Yeah, welcome. If you're joining our session, this is, as I said right at the beginning, this is the third part of our autumn webinar series. So if it's your first time here, thank you very much for joining us. If you're a returning visitor, yeah, great to have you back. And today we're going to be looking at something that's been coming up a lot, of our customers recently, which is about adapting and developing sort of pedagogies around using Vevox in a sort of a virtual environment, which obviously a lot of people were doing over the last couple of years, and now transitioning to back into a face-to-face environment. So for a lot of people, their first experience of using Vevox was in that sort of online environment, using it as an online tool, which it's great for. But it's also a fantastic tool to use in a face-to-face teaching lesson as well. So we've got Guy Aitchison from Loughborough University with us today. Guy is going to be talking about his experience of adapting Vevox to those two different sort of settings. So he's going to talk about how he was using Vevox in the past in that kind of online environment, and then using it now primarily as a face-to-face student engagement tool. So just as a really brief introduction to Guy, and I'm sure he will introduce himself when he gets started, but yeah, Guy's a lecturer at Loughborough University. It's a customer that we've worked with for a number of years now. Guy's a lecturer in politics and international studies at the university, who primarily teaches political philosophy and applied ethics. So as I said right at the beginning, Guy is going to talk about his experience of using Vevox in that online environment, and then how he's adapted it and how he's using it now in a sort of a face-to-face environment. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Guy. So I'll make you the presenter.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for that introduction, and thank you to everyone joining today. Yeah, so my name's Guy Aitchison. I'm a lecturer in politics and international studies at the University of Loughborough, where I've been since 2019. And I teach in the International Relations, Politics and History department. So in this talk, I'm going to be talking about online and in person. So it's two environments, but it's really actually three classroom environments I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to be talking about online only, hybrid or blended learning, as we called it at Loughborough, where you have in person and some people joining online, and then the more recent transition that I've used Vevox for in person only teaching, which is what we're back to this year. So okay then, so let me just give some background then to the kind of teaching I do. So as Joe mentioned, I teach in politics and especially in political philosophy. So the kinds of topics I look at are ones where we're keen to encourage as much debate as possible in the kind of Socratic tradition, you might say, of philosophy, where there are no right answers. We're just looking at ways of posing the right questions and thinking about them in an illuminating way, hopefully. So I've been using Vevox as a tool to kind of supplement and enhance discussion, whether it's online or in person. Vevox is the tool that's used and recommended, I think, by Loughborough University and has been for some time. I hadn't heard of it myself until around about 2019-20. And the context in which I heard about it was through doing training in teaching qualification, which is the higher education fellowship, which we have to do as part of our probation at Loughborough. And that's pretty much the norm, I think, from a lot of UK universities. And during the course, we learn about different teaching technologies. We also learn about different kind of pedagogical theories. So I was coming into contact with ideas around sort of active learning, peer-based learning, and all these kinds of pedagogical theories in my practice. And that's when I came across the technology of Vevox. And it wasn't something that I'd heard about before, but I started to use it primarily in the context of online teaching. Obviously, that was at the beginning of 2020 when we shifted online for the first lockdown. And my main experience of using Vevox has been in a module which I've been teaching for the past 4 years, which is called Power Politics and Ideology. So this is a first year core module in our department. It's taken by around about 200 or so students on average, who come from backgrounds in history, politics, international relations, PPE, so a broad range of backgrounds. And what I teach is the ideology. So I teach feminism, anarchism, liberalism, Marxism, fascism, multiculturalism. And the idea is to kind of try and understand the history of these ideologies, but also to kind of critically evaluate and assess them. So I'm always keen to encourage as much class debate as possible. So I'm not using Vevox in a way to test their knowledge and give them right or wrong answers, although very occasionally I might do that. I'm trying to use it to generate debate, get them to think about the issues under discussion, and also to get a sense of where they're at in terms of their understanding and their ability to articulate ideas. So some of the challenges I sort of faced when teaching this course are probably ones that many of you guys will have encountered in teaching first year undergraduate courses, if you've done that. So firstly, it's that participation tends to be relatively low in the lectures. It tends to usually be the same people who answer questions, who put their hands up in class. So out of a class of about 100 or so people, I might get just a few hands going up, if that. Sometimes no one speaks at all. Very rarely do people actually ask questions in person, I've found. So when I'm teaching a big lecture hall of 100 people in person, I often finish and say, any questions? And, you know, I very rarely get people who are brave enough to put their hands up and ask me something. I'm not quite sure why exactly that is. It may well be that they're afraid of letting on that they haven't understood something or something like that, but that's a particular issue. There's also the kind of length of the lectures. When I first came to Loughborough, I was surprised to see that we had actually quite a few 2-hour lectures, which I was really amazed by at first. I thought, how on earth am I going to fill all that time? 2 hours, it seems like ages. But when you're giving the lecture and you get into the flow of it, that time can pass. But of course, for the students, it can be difficult to maintain their concentration for a whole period of 2 hours. So, you know, the length is also something that was a challenge. There's also the fact that, like I say, the students were coming from quite a diverse background in terms of their abilities and attainment. And also, you know, some students were coming from a history background, some students had studied philosophy before and were a lot more confident. So yeah, it's many of the standard challenges one might face from the first year course of that kind. So I was interested in trying to make the lectures more interactive, have more engagement and so on, from starting from quite a low base where there wasn't really that much class-based participation at all. It was usually only a few people talking. So yeah, during the course of the Higher Education Fellowship, we came across a lot of pedagogical literature that I hadn't really looked at before. A lot of it kind of confirms things that you understand already through your experience. But one of the things that does come across is that there are ways in which online forums can provide opportunities for people to participate who might otherwise be too shy. As Williams and Lehman put it here, this can provide a chance for people to shine online, as it were, which is a quote I quite like. And online polling as well can be useful in gaining participation. So it was throughout the course of 2019 to 2020, as I said, that we moved online, and I started using Vevox to use the word cloud function, which I'll talk about in a moment, to poll people on their opinions, and on their ideas. We used it to generate text, which was a way of getting more detailed answers from them to test their understanding and again generate ideas, and also to solicit questions, which is something that, like I said, people were often a bit too shy about before. And on that point about the questions, yeah, just as Joe said, there is a Vevox login for this session. I've put it on the top of this slide. If anyone wants to ask a question or just to make a point, I'll be really interested in hearing about other people's experiences as well. So I'm trying to talk about some of the benefits I've seen in using the tools and some of the things I'm still trying to work out and manage as we move to purely in-person teaching. So if you go to 122-683-443, we will be picking up the questions. So yes, the first form of delivery at the beginning of 2020 was purely online virtual delivery, and how that started in our case, teaching power politics as an ideology, was that we would do a pre-record of the lecture using a software called Panopto. So I would just talk to camera, record a lecture, and then they could watch it in their own time on demand. Now, of course, it turns out that not everyone, and surprisingly, watched it from beginning to end. I was able to access the data through Panopto of how many people had watched it. Quite a lot of people started it, but then didn't necessarily watch it till the end. I was able to try and make the pre-recorded lectures a bit more interactive by using built-in quizzes. So, you know, at certain points along the recording, it would ask you something, and then by answering the question, you could move to the next stage. So that was a way of trying to making a pre-recorded lecture a bit more interactive. But I still found that students weren't necessarily using that as much as I would like. So what I did for a number of sessions was to use live Teams broadcast in combination with Vevox to give live virtual sessions, essentially. And that was an improvement on pre-records, I think, made it more interesting and engaging for them. There was also still quite a few challenges that I came across here. One issue was that students very rarely wanted to make points or ask questions online. If people were shy in person, I found they were even more shy about turning their camera on and making a point to the whole class. And even when I tried to remind them occasionally to turn their cameras on, or requested them, obviously some people had reasons why they didn't want to turn their cameras on, often they didn't. So it was quite a fragmented experience, and there wasn't much of a kind of classroom you know, environment there. But I found that Vevox was a useful tool to you know, actually kind of drive engagement when people weren't really willing to speak in front of the group. It was a big breakthrough when Microsoft Teams introduced the breakout tool for us, because then I could actually put people into small groups to have discussions in groups of 2 to 5 or what have you, and they could discuss things there. And then maybe I might combine a small discussion in breakout rooms with a poll when which we could then discuss together, hopefully. Because at all times I found that Vevox works best when it had discussion either beforehand feeding into the polling and the questions, or after as well. So yeah, when I was using purely virtual delivery, I would use the Teams chat to generate questions. That was pretty useful. That actually, I was surprised at how much people did communicate via the Teams chat, and sometimes it did get a bit spicy. It got a bit you know, banter heavy in the Teams chat, so that had to be kind of pulled back at various points. But there was a kind of participatory atmosphere that could be good, and the comments and the questions that got the most likes were ones that I could then address to everyone. So yes, Vevox in that context was quite useful at bringing people together, getting engagement when we were doing it live online through Teams. Towards the autumn of 2020, we were teaching at Loughborough in a context that was in person, but with a significant number of people joining online as well. So it was a hybrid delivery model, because a lot of students were self-isolating in halls. So for Power Politics and Ideology, for this module, I was giving repeat lectures to socially distanced classrooms of students obviously wearing masks, and then some people would also join on Teams. So I had a monitor in front of me that was on Teams, and I'd position myself in front of that. The lecture hall would be behind me. So I was trying to address the people in the hall whilst addressing people online, and using Microsoft Teams on my phone to get comments from people joining online. Now, this works better than I thought it might do. I thought it was going to be a complete nightmare and terrible and difficult, because obviously, you know, and I should mention as well, we also had Panopto recording as well at the same time. So there was a lot going on, technologically speaking, but it worked okay. The main challenge, of course, was that the online learners could often feel cut off from the classroom. At certain points, there was maybe 5 people in person and about 60 people online. So it was important to try and make them feel included. And again, Vevox was one of the ways in which I was able to do this. They enjoyed doing online polling, word clouds, things like that, that we could then discuss together. And people who were joining in person would also log on to Teams as well. They could ask questions through the group chat. So it was trying to create a kind of, networked learning environment, as it were, sort of using different technologies, different platforms to engage and interact. And it wasn't just me lecturing them. Another aspect of this kind of hybrid and online model was that, there was kind of a great deal of interaction, a great deal of engagement online that was good, that could sometimes get a bit off track, which needed some degree of management to kind of keep it focused on the discussion in hand. But it was, I think, quite successful and enjoyable for the students. And yes, it was a way of kind of encouraging sort of peer-to-peer learning. So one of the interesting things about when you have people using their devices, you can kind of instantly pull up information through Google. Someone might go and do a bit of research and come back and discuss it. And we can, reflect on that. And it was kind of much more interactive and participative in that way. But obviously there were these difficulties in the kind of having a split classroom, which could be difficult to manage at time. And also the fact that people were socially distanced from one another, wearing masks. They were much less inclined, even more less inclined to kind of speak in the lecture hall in front of everyone. So, Vevox and Teams was a way in which people could get over some of the barriers to participation there. So last year, but most certainly this year, we've moved fully to in person at Loughborough. So now I'm giving the lecture in a large lecture hall, one of the bigger lecture halls we have. There's usually about maybe, on a good day, about 120 people who turn up for the lecture. Sometimes it's less than that. It might be about 80 or 90 if they've got other stuff going on. But I've continued to use Vevox in this context then. And I use it alongside PowerPoint, and I've managed to work out how to embed it in my PowerPoints now, so that I can actually get the data back and project it onto the PowerPoint slides without having to move in between PowerPoint and Vevox. So it does that well when it comes to the polls. It does it well when it comes to the word cloud. It doesn't quite do it yet when it comes to the text-based responses, partly because there'll just be too much text, I think, to generate and put on the screen. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because some of the replies you get in the text aren't always ones you'd automatically want to broadcast on there. And again, that's something I'll talk about maybe a bit more in a moment. But the way I use it in a lecture hall is really as a way to kind of supplement and enhance in-person discussion. So I do find that you get great levels of participation. Like I said, in a purely in-person Q&A, you might get a few people participating, usually the same voices. Some people towards the end of term might start plucking up the courage to speak, but generally it's quite low. But the participation rates with Vevox tend to be much higher, around 90% or more of people participating, sometimes 100% too, because people do have their devices, they have their laptops with them. And one of the ways I found that it works best now is if I'm going to do an online poll, I won't just poll them straight away. I will actually put them into pairs and discuss the question beforehand, and then think through their answer together, and then we can poll them. Then we can generate the actual results, where we can get the temperature of the room when it comes to certain questions I ask them about feminism, socialism, liberalism, and so on. And then after that, we can have a discussion that follows on from it. So I think it's been really successful in kind of getting people engaged. The students do tend to like it as well. I think there's some challenges which I'm still sort of thinking through. I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts about them. I think one of the challenges is some of the anonymity that can come in the way people engage. So I talked earlier about how when we're doing purely online teaching, the Teams chat could get a bit derailed at times through the kind of volume of, shall we say, banter that happened on the Teams chat. And sometimes some of it was quite funny and entertaining, and the students seemed to have a good time when they were interacting on the Teams chat. But sometimes it did veer off topic and wasn't always as civil as I would have liked it to be, shall we say. Now, that was in the Teams chat, the comments are anonymous. So students actually had their names attached to the comments. And still, some of the comments were pretty off topic. But with the Q&A, sometimes that can happen in Vevox. It doesn't happen too much, and it's generally what works really well, and students take it seriously. But sometimes it can get a bit off topic. Another potential issue that I'm sort of interested in hearing people's thoughts out or thinking through is I do think that sometimes it is a way to enhance concentration and keep students engaged if I have Vevox polls at regular intervals throughout a 2-hour lecture. But sometimes I worry about sending them off into looking into their phones, and they may just get distracted by Instagram or TikTok or what have you. And I'm not totally sure that they are actually following along. When they're looking at their phones, they might be doing something else. But I don't know. I mean, that seems to be the direction of travel in terms of a lot of teaching and learning now, in that people could just be using their smartphone to take notes or something like that. So, it's very difficult to kind of regulate that. And I'm not sure you'd necessarily want to either. The other issue is that I wouldn't like, Vevox to be seen as a kind of substitute for public speaking. So I do think public speaking is a useful skill that students should learn, and the only way they can really master that skill is to put themselves in the uncomfortable situation where they have to ask a question or answer a question in a lecture. I remember in my undergraduate days, if I knew I was going to have to speak in front of a seminar or lecture room, my heart rate would go up. I'd start, getting very nervous, and I didn't really want to do it at all. But it was only by practice that I eventually managed to become more confident at it. And there's something, of course, that organisations and employers value as well. So it is useful to have the skill of public speaking in lots of different ways. So I am still keen to try and encourage that as well. And Vevox may be a kind of way of stimulating it, because by getting them to discuss things, it can be a way to kind of build their confidence when it comes to participating as well. So I thought now I would run through some examples of the different ways that I do use Vevox in class, the different functions and how they kind of work when it comes to teaching something like power politics and ideology, which is a kind of critical discipline within a critical discipline of political theory. So I like to use icebreakers at the start of the session. There was a fantastic webinar that was given through Vevox by Bruce, who talked about some of the entertaining icebreakers that he uses at the start of session to get students interested and engaged. And I think that's a great idea. I tend to use icebreakers that are actually about the topic that I'm teaching on. Maybe because I don't have the imagination to dream up lots of kind of interesting and entertaining ones, but I also like to keep the students broadly focused on the topic in hand. You'll see here I asked, who is John Locke? They pretty much all knew it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it's a way of kind of boosting their confidence at the beginning if they can all get the right answer and keep them engaged. So I do use it as a kind of icebreaker at the beginning. The other one is to kind of get them to engage in a degree of kind of critical discussion, critical evaluation. So yes, mostly the way in which I use polls, it's not to test right or wrong answers, apart from the icebreaker you just saw. It's mainly to kind of stimulate debate. So in this one I asked, is nationalism a destructive force or is it beneficial? And then I will maybe ask, who has said it was destructive? Do you want to give your reasons why? Who says it was beneficial? Do you want to give your reasons why? Yeah, often I have a don't know option, but sometimes I just remove the don't know option just because I want to force them to kind of take a side rather than sitting on the fence. But of course, yeah, obviously the nuance of these issues is going to come out in the discussion. So I might put them into pairs or threes to discuss this together beforehand. Then they can do the poll and answer the poll on it. And then once we've generated the results, then I can kind of have a discussion. Oh, isn't it interesting? I wonder why people think that, and open it up to a class debate. Yeah, the word cloud is one of my favorite ones to use, actually. So typically how I would do this when it comes to teaching ideologies is I'll ask them, well, what's the one word, what's the one concept you most associate with this particular ideology, like conservatism? And that generates quite an attractive set of data that we can show on PowerPoint. We'll discuss that together, so you get different ideas: tradition, pragmatism, gradualism. I can then talk through these with through the class. Maybe I'll ask some people to try and clarify them. But again, it is anonymous, and you do get some comments there, like, some of them obviously critical, like racist or selfish, but then you get things like scum as well, which is just kind of not that common, but that's the kind of thing that might happen if you do use sort of anonymous polling tools. So yeah, word cloud is a real favorite of mine. I like how that works. The students seem to like it too. If you look at the number of people that have fed back, there are 123. That's pretty much almost everyone in the lecture who's been kind of required to think about this. This is the text function. So this is really useful to getting people to write a bit more in depth. They can maybe write one sentence or two. And I use this here to kind of test their understanding of some of the material I've already covered in the lecture. So say, what are some of the arguments that Britain or the European powers use to justify empire building? I've got some pretty good answers there. And I can go through them. I can select the best ones. I can clarify any misconceptions as well. So I can give kind of formative feedback on what they've said. If some of them said something that's pretty off topic, I can pull them up on it or correct them on it. So yeah, that works pretty well. Like I say, it doesn't go onto the PowerPoint slides, that one. You have to have another device that you're checking that on. Or yeah, just kind of go to another tab in your browser. Yeah, so then the Q&A is a really useful tool. Like I say, I've had way more questions now I've started using the Q&A, and some really good ones as well. And the nice thing about that is that they can actually like the questions that they like the most. So even if they're not answering a question, they can read other students' questions and say, well, that's a good question, that's a useful question, and I'm going to vote for that one. And often it is the good questions that do get the most votes. Like if it's an intelligent, well-worded question, it will get a good amount of votes. So the first one, if classical liberalism is committed to natural rights, is it not a contradiction to subject the working class to alienating work as it goes against the natural right of freedom? Realistically, they had no other choice or opportunity and were forced into this economic relationship. So that was a lecture on socialism and Marxism that I gave. Yeah, great question. That's something I would just answer in class. At first, I was hesitant about the use of the Q&A tool, because I thought I would have to be constantly checking the Q&A, and that would kind of distract me and it would be a bit difficult to manage. So the way I do it now is I have a break always halfway through the lecture, and I say to the students, ask questions in the first half of the lecture, then I'll check it during the break, and then I'll come back and I'll answer them towards the end. After the break, and it's a bit easier to manage that way rather than having a constant stream of questions. And I asked them to keep the questions focused on the actual content of the lecture rather than asking me questions about the assessment or the word count, or do bibliographies count towards word count and things of that nature. Yeah, and of course, you know, it's anonymous. You do get some banter kind of answers as well. One of them here, heating for this room, it was really hot when I gave this lecture. For some reason, the heating was on really high and a lot of the students were complaining, and I was getting a lot of questions and requests about the heating in the Q&A. So one of the students said, heating for this room must be more than a year's pay for Guy, I reckon, which was quite amusing and probably not untrue either. So that was quite entertaining. That one got 12 likes. Some of them were a bit less funny and a bit more off topic, but again, I think there's a trade-off, you know, between sort of participation sometimes and sort of anonymity, and you know, it may be worth thinking about the issue around anonymity, and you know, maybe it would be better if people had their names attached to the questions, or they had the option of putting their names on the questions. But I don't know, maybe that might put people off asking questions as well. So I do think that the Q&A is a great way of kind of soliciting questions as well. So yeah, broadly, my experience of using Vevox and using it in person now, students do really like it and value it. They found it really easy to use. It's quite straightforward to use. There's not too much functionality, which is quite useful. And yeah, it's a way to kind of drive discussion. So I say that I like to use it in person as a supplement, not as a substitute for in-person discussion, both before the polling and after the polling. And ideally, students will be encouraged to kind of speak in class. And maybe this can be a kind of gateway into doing that, to have these discussions. And it's a great way to kind of assess feedback, assess their understanding, and solicit questions as well. Some of the challenges, I guess, have been, yeah, I guess, related to this issue of kind of anonymity of it, some of the discussion, and, you know, issues around potential distraction as well. But I think these aren't really big issues. I think that kind of on balance, it does work very well, and the students do enjoy it, and they engage in a way that they wouldn't necessarily, and they're able to focus much more. So there's another course I teach, Contemporary Debates in Philosophy, where the lecture's only 1 hour and then we immediately have a seminar. So I've tended to not use Vevox in that one, just because there's a lot of material I want to get through. And I don't want to have too much discussion if we're going to immediately have a seminar after. But one of the students did feedback recently that they wanted more things like Vevox polls, questions, short group discussions and lectures to encourage students to be more engaged. So yeah, I think those are Part B students that saw me using Vevox in the first year, and they kind of hope to see Vevox in the lecture. So I'll have a think about it. Obviously, you know, in a 2-hour lecture, there's lots of space for using it, because I like to have discussion as well. If it's a 1 hour lecture followed by the seminar, I'd probably be much more limited in my use of it. But yeah, okay. I think I'll probably leave it there for now. Thanks for listening. Hopefully if people have any comments or questions, we can talk about that.
That was awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Guy. I really liked your point actually about valuing public speaking, and how, you know, there is, I've always found that, you know, that's that sort of balancing line to tread if you're using Vevox, you know, for Q&A. Actually, if you're just relying on that solely for receiving questions, you know, it's quite can almost be quite silent. You know, it's just you reading out, you know, people's questions and then answering it. And I think there's definitely something to be said for, you know, getting that input and that discussion coming in verbally from people, but also encouraging, you know, those skills, you know, in public speaking, as you, you know, as you alluded to. And actually, there's a few questions amongst the many questions that have come in about that. So we'll get on to the questions now. I'm just going to make myself the presenter again. Cool. Yeah. So we'll get on to the Q&A. Just a little reminder, if you haven't, this is you know, a part of a webinar series that we've run. So if you want to see all the rest of the webinar series and look at the recording of this, you know, afterwards, the best place for that is our YouTube channel. So yeah, please do subscribe to that if you want to get all the latest news and the latest sort of updates and videos as we post them. Yeah, please don't. Yeah, please do remember to subscribe to that. You can also follow us on LinkedIn as well. And again, it's a great resource for you know, getting all the latest news and blogs and things like that. So we have got lots of questions. So I'm going to jump straight into Vevox and look at those now. Looking at the number of questions that come in, I don't think we'll get through them all, but we will look at them all and make sure that we you know, try to sort of answer those in any sort of post sort of webinar blog or anything like that. So there are a couple of sort of not really questions, but you know, sort of points here. So there was, you know, something here about you know, being able to, I think this was when you were talking about you know, words coming into the word cloud that words appropriate. So you know, it's just a point there about sort of being able to manually remove individual words.
Yeah,
and,
yeah, that's a good point.
Like that.
Yeah.
Cool. This was an interesting one. I don't know whether you want to again, not really a question, but I don't know if you want to sort of tackle that. So Vevox being a sort of really good back channel, and then a comment about Twitter on there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. Some great points, and it's useful about removing the words. Yeah, it'd be difficult. It does. Then you're kind of into the question. It does take a bit of time to do that. So yeah, you might be able to take a moment to do that. But yeah, that is useful. I didn't know that. And also, there is a filter, I think, to get rid of rude words, but then there's still going to be some, like scum, someone points out, that might come through. Yeah, some people saying that upvoting is a useful tool. Yeah, and then I think someone makes a really great point that I might have mentioned as well, and that kind of chimes with my experience, which is that students may not just they may not just be kind of shy about participating in class, but they may worry that people won't, that their opinion is kind of unusual or unique and people don't agree with them. But when they see lots of other people who have the similar opinion, they might feel a bit more confident to kind of articulate it as well. So yeah, that's a great point as well.
Yeah, I mean, I liked you gave quite a few examples there, but one of the ones I really liked was the you know, using it for a debate is a really nice you know, really nice tool. I don't know whether this is what you you know, you do because I note that you run it within you know, PowerPoint a lot, but when you're using you know, when you're using sort of the present view for running sort of polls, you can show those results coming in you know, dynamically and see them updating. And sometimes you can you know, leave that open over a long period of time, and actually people can change their minds, and you can dynamically see that opinion changing, which is quite nice.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Someone says, how do you find the PowerPoint integration? I found it pretty good so far. I did used to have it so there was a big clock timer, like the kind of countdown clock on the screen that go da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But then I kind of stopped that because I found it I prefer to just kind of count down manually. So one of the things I'll do is I'll be like, well, I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'll just kind of because then I can see how the discussion's going in the room. If the discussion dies down, I can bring the poll to close or open it. Or if the kind of discussion's still raging, I can kind of let them talk for a bit longer rather than having the automatic timer. But I found the PowerPoint has worked quite well. At the moment, well, I use a Mac mainly, so hopefully I'm going to soon have access to the kind of Mac plugin to use it, because I use my PC. I have to go and switch to PC when I'm editing the tools, but Joe says I think that there is a Mac PowerPoint plugin, which is out now, so hopefully I'll be able to get hold of that soon.
Yeah, I mean, you've pointed out, and I promise this wasn't to the audience, this wasn't deliberate, but you have pointed out actually a couple of sort of new features that have come out.
Right, okay.
Which I will let you know about. But this is not a this is a webinar for sharing your best practice, not a plug. But the so we have now got a countdown timer that's available in the present view as well. So if you're launching polls from this view here, you've got the ability, you might notice it just grayed out on this control bar down here. You can launch a countdown timer, and that has some other features like being able to sort of reopen polls as well. So if someone says, oh, I didn't have enough time to answer the question, you can reopen it and get some more answers in. And as you've alluded to, we do have a new PowerPoint add-in that's available now that works across sort of Office 365. So sort of Windows and Mac and things like that. So there was the points here about the sort of the public speaking again, that sort of came in. And actually, I noticed there was a question as well about, do you have any kind of sort of techniques for encouraging that? If you've got Vevox going on and people are able to ask questions there, how do you bring that out to people?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess generally one might go about that in the seminar when you kind of set group presentations and things like that, where everyone has to speak. So normally in the seminar, that's where they might try out public speaking a bit more. But often I'm in a lecture, I'll be quite honest about my own experience being someone who started out really nervous in public speaking and was able to see that it was really only just exposing myself to that situation over and over where I kind of was able to get over it. And one thing I noticed is if you just ask them straight away a question, you'll have the same people put their hands up. But if you get them to talk to one another first and then ask the question, talk to one another in pairs, then ask a question, you'll get lots more people willing to speak in front of the whole class, and many more of them, because they've kind of tried out their ideas on their friend and they've built up a bit of confidence, and then they're much more likely to do it.
Yeah. Do you find that over time, as the sort of semester sort of progresses, people's confidence to speak aloud increases?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the beginning, the first few weeks of a first year course, it might only be in a lecture hall of 100 or so people. It might be sort of 3 people, but then it does gradually pick up, and then by the second year, third year, you'll get more. Still, people do stay quite nervous about it, but you do get more people willing to speak publicly.
Yeah, nice. There were some points as well about sort of icebreakers and people agreeing that they use icebreakers as well. So this person here tried to use 2 icebreakers, one informal, the students log in for engagement, and a couple related to the topic.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Which is really, really nice. Just trying to see if there's any other questions. I appreciate it's 14:48, so we might draw it to a conclusion. Actually, there were a couple of questions here came in about the Q&A and which platforms did you use. So you noted that you used kind of Teams. Did you use Teams and Vevox, or just Teams?
So when I was doing it online only and just virtual, I would just use Teams for the Q&A, just the chat, because it was just easier than moving before too often. But then I found that there's a bit too many questions again, so I would use the upvoting to kind of filter them. But now when I'm in person only, I'm not using Teams at all. We don't have anyone joining online. We record it through Panopto, but unless you're there, you're not going to participate online. So we have I use Vevox there for the Q&A. Yeah, and gathered the questions so I can answer them in one go rather than kind of continuously answering them. That's my other tip.
Yeah, nice. Okay, cool. I think what we'll do is we'll wrap it up there. And if there are any questions that have come in that we didn't get a chance to answer, we'll look at a way of trying to get some answers to that in any kind of post-webinar sort of write-up that we do. Guy, thank you very much for joining us. That was really interesting.
Yeah,
I enjoyed
thanks.
it a great deal. And
thanks for all the questions and comments. Really helpful.
Yeah. It's great. And actually, this is an invitation to, you guys in the audience. Guy contacted us, after one of our previous webinars and, said that he had something that he'd sort of like to share. And, I agreed. I thought it was really interesting. So if anyone else is out there thinking that, you've got a story that you'd love to, share with our community and our, group of users, and we'd love to hear from you. And all that remains for me to say is thank you very much, and we'll end it there and look out for the recording. And we will almost certainly be running a new series in the spring, so keep your eyes out for that. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.